All right, Santiago, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm really excited to chat with you. And I think folks who are watching this, many of them will probably already know a little bit about you and your background. But for those who don't yet, can you just start by sharing a little bit of an introduction, who you are, a little bit about
Right.
what you work on every day?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a developer at heart that transitioned into machine learning probably about 6 years ago, 7 years ago. And right now, that's what I spend most of my time. I work for a company in South Florida. And what we do is we partner with Boston Dynamics uh, specifically for the Spot robot, and we implement computer vision algorithms to make the robot see the world. That's a good summary. Super challenging, but super fun type of work, and it's mostly centered around computer vision and machine learning. So that's it.
Very cool, and it's also a very very vivid example of machine learning. I think the idea of robots being able to see is something probably that feels yeah, very futuristic. So it's very cool that that's what you spend your days working on.
Yeah.
I definitely want to hear more about that, but I actually want to go backwards in time a little bit, because I think one of the things that I am certainly most interested in is how you have made the journey from this extensive career in software development into machine learning. Right. And because I know that's something you talk a lot about, and it's something that your audience really gravitates towards, is that evolution. So maybe just start by talking about what that journey looked like for you, how it came about, and maybe some obstacles you encountered.
Yeah, absolutely. So number one, it's about the reason I really like the machine learning world. And I decided to, I don't like to say that I made a switch, but basically I sort of like started doing more of machine learning, is because the nature of the problems that I have to face today is very different to the nature of it, like a regular software problem, right? Like I feel like most of the software problems that I faced before were deterministic. I knew how to get to a certain point. It was just about execution most of the time. Here, there is a lot of research. There is a lot of unknowns. There is a lot of trade-offs that didn't exist in the software world. So that's something, that extra challenge is something that it's very appealing to me. So the reason I transitioned, or when I transitioned, how that came about, was because I decided to take my master's. Since I came to the United States, one of my, so right at the top of my bucket list was I want to go to college here. I want to experience graduate education here. So I had the opportunity with Georgia Tech to do my master's. I went into my master's thinking about computer science in general, but then I found out that they had a machine learning specialization. Started taking one class and I said, okay, this is my thing. This super challenging thing, it's my thing going forward. That's how I started. And it all trickles down from that point, right? How do I find documentation? How do I actually apply the stuff that I'm listening here? I'm listening to a professor tell me a bunch of stuff, but I'm not sure how to connect that to my real job, which is what I have to do, from 9 to 5. In pursuit of that connection, in pursuit of how to make machine learning useful, is where the content creation comes from, is where the finding good materials that teach me not only the theory that is great, but how we can translate that into actual value. That's where my passion is.
And is it right to assume then that you felt like there was an absence of that there wasn't as much content or instruction or learning around how you connect the dots between the theory and the practice? Yeah,
absolutely. And by the way, that's 2015, so that's six years ago, which for all that matters, it might be an eternity in technology years, right? So machine learning is still very new, and most of the documentation, most of the content is coming out of academia. So obviously, it's very tilted towards research, right? And even the best practices that you get, even the tips and tricks are very focused on research or on Kaggle competitions, which is very, very different than what you're going to find out in a real world application, right? So yeah, it's no wonder whenever people start learning about this and start try to make sense of the entire amount of information that's out there, it's very challenging to take that and actually apply it in real life scenarios. So yeah, the documentation is lacking. Professors at school, they come from an academia background, so all of that is contributing to this. It's much better now, by the way. 2021 is way better than it was back in the day, but still.
Well, and part of that has to do, right, with you and people like you contributing to that conversation. So maybe just share a little bit about what are the kinds of ways that you're trying to help push that a little bit forward and help drive the connection between practice and theory home for folks who are looking to get into this space and for whom that's a real priority.
I think, you can easily summarize it by talking about the stuff that I'm finding every single day, right? Like right now, I'm working on a data set. I'm doing a lot of manual work on a data set of images. And I have so many ideas of things that I want to talk about that are normally not being talked about. Like one idea that just came to my mind right now is not only the importance of data augmentation, which everyone knows that is very important, but it's to actually validate that the data augmentation that you're doing on your data set is producing good results, and the reason why that might be screwing with your training process. So finding the issues in real life that are beyond what the book says you should augment your data and this is why, or trying that, finding the problems with that and talking about them, that's the main avenue I have to communicate with other people that are trying to do this, right? Like I've gotten a much better understanding of why this is a rule and why you should never do this by practicing it and by talking about it, because then I get to communicate with other people that have tried or that have a different perspective. So that's sort of like a feedback loop there of trying something, communicating with people, listening to what they have to say. That is super, super rewarding for sure. And that is sort of like an engine that produces more and more content.
That's great. Yeah, I want to go back to something you said earlier about how for you a shift in, I guess the way you were sort of encountering problems in the world was ones that were maybe more deterministic and maybe solved through kind of more traditional software development, and then ones where there were maybe more variables and kind of the magic, if you will, of machine learning maybe had more of a role to play. Do you see that as sort of a growing reality for software development writ large? Like, is that a source of why people are following you on Twitter and subscribing to your newsletter, because they are also software developers encountering that kind of similar reality?
I think so. That's part of it. Another part is obviously you cannot forget that machine learning is very sexy right now. Not only, the title of it, but the salaries, the market is going nuts over machine learning engineers.
Yeah,
it's super sought after. So obviously all of that contributes to this, right? Sort of like sudden interest. Machine learning, it's proven to be very, very useful over the last few years. So we went from the early 2000s where we have all of these experiments are really, really cool, to now it is practically impossible for a person not to interact at any given day with something that's powered by machine learning. From your phone to your TV, there's so many points of interaction with really useful algorithms that are making your life better. So all of that obviously contributes to more companies looking for software developers / machine learning practitioners, and more people trying to get in the bandwagon. And yeah, I think that's part of it.
And what do you envision as sort of the future of the role of the software developer in a world where increasingly everything has a machine learning element?
I think those two roles are going to merge eventually. I don't know how long, but I don't think you're going to be able to separate them and say, well, I'm only doing software development, I'm only doing machine learning. I think they're going to tend to merge into a person that solves problems, and part of your tools are going to be tools that use more deterministic algorithms, like a sorting algorithm, and another tool that's maybe a linear regression. They're going to have to apply for certain type of data, but you're going to be doing both of those without necessarily having to specialize. And by the way, there's always, I believe, there's always going to be researchers that are going to focus on one area or the other area, just like there is today. But for most of us, for people that are trying to take all of these techniques and apply them in the industry, I think those roles are going to tend to merge.
And do you have a sense of what, even at a high level, will have to change in the ecosystem, in academia, in industry, to realize that result?
I think we're not waiting for anything. I think the thing that's missing right now is more companies applying this, and it's a matter of time, right? Like if I look just 5 years ago, the conversations that we were having at our company, most of the conversations ended with, yeah, I think we want that. That is great. Give us a year so we can go and figure out the data problem that we have. And in a year, we're going to talk to you guys again to apply all of those cool magic. The conversations that we're having today, 5 years later, are very, very different, where you get many, many companies that are ready to apply machine learning. They already have data. They already have a good idea of what machine learning is going to be able to do for them. And again, guarantee these are usually big companies, but that's the early days of the web, right? 1998, where people didn't know they needed a website, and that started changing very, very rapidly. So I think we are in the midst of that transition. And in 5 years from now, most companies are going to have machine learning as part of their process. I'm pretty sure of that.
And you probably get questions about this from your audience all the time. What are sort of the biggest pieces of advice that you give to software developers who share the belief, have bought into that vision of the future, and want to be a part of it? Are there things that you're telling them, okay, you want to make sure you've learned this or you've experienced this? What sort of advice do you give those people?
Well, probably the most useful advice is that I tell people, don't think about making, like, what scares most. I mean, if you've been in the industry for 10 years and somebody comes along telling you, well, what you're doing right here, just stop doing that and start doing this, obviously that's going to be very scary. That is not the right way of looking at this thing. You don't have to transition. You don't have to switch, right? It's not like you need to stop doing what you're doing and start doing something else. You have to augment your skill set with some of these techniques. You don't need to become a researcher. You just need to start adding small tools to your tool set so you can start expanding the horizon and the number of problems that you can tackle. That's exactly how I started. Beyond the classes that I was getting, was about looking at a problem and saying, you know what? I could apply this little thing to that problem on top of everything else that I'm doing for this company. I'm still developing software. I still need to put together a front end and a database and a back end, but I can also offer them the ability to implement this particular feature that requires machine learning. So that, I think, is a great sort of like frame of mind for developers to tackle this, is what can I add on top of what I already know? It's going to be small enough that I can, maybe pick it up in a couple of weeks or 3-4 weeks, and I can start immediately add value. I can start adding value by adding just that piece.
Do you think then, it sounds like you don't believe necessarily that they need to, go back to school and become data scientists?
Right. They don't have to. No, for sure not. So no, I mean, there is so many resources out there that you can start very slowly making progress through those, that you don't need to go back to school and be a data scientist. I don't know. There's so many that come to mind right now that are specifically geared towards how can you make an impact right away without boring you with the details. One that comes to mind is like Fast AI. Fast.ai, that website has a tutorial, a deep learning tutorial, not tutorial, but a course for developers, specifically for developers. I really like that approach because they say that, you know, they make an analogy with playing baseball, right? Like you don't tell kids, let me sit you down in a classroom, give you all of the rules, and once you master those, I'm gonna let you go out in the field. That's not the way you learn baseball. You just find a ball, find a bat, start hitting the ball, and people will start picking up the rules as they go. That's exactly how they approach machine learning. And I think it's a perfect example of how can you bring more people in without scaring them and telling them, well, you need to, you know, 4 hours of math and calculus and whatnot. Yeah.
And I think another piece of that, at least I've heard, as you know, we've talked to developers in the past and also businesses that are thinking about implementing machine learning, is there's definitely the intimidation factor of all of the math and the courses, and people are frequently say like, you know, I don't want to spend 150 hours, you know, having to learn this new thing. Is there any sort of way to get more quickly to value? Another thing, though, I think, and you mentioned this a moment ago with regards to like businesses being ready for ML, is like availability of data and like the preparation of that data and sort of the engineering of that data in a way that you know, is sort of model ready, you know, is ready to sort of start to derive insights from. Have you noticed any shifts in that over the years? Like, what are the shifts that you've noticed that lead you to believe that there are companies that are that are more ready for that today than they used to be?
Yeah, so number one, it's just personal experience from working at a company that does that you know, talks to clients, and we sort of like engage with them, offer them our services, and we see sort of like the state at which they are. And by the way, it's all over, you know, like Fortune 500 companies to mid-sized businesses. And we've seen this shift of the conversation, right? From, oh, wow, that's magic, to now CTOs and CIOs that understand where AI is going to take them. We went from having on every single phone call, having to sort of like help the person on the other side of the phone understand where the value was, and sort of like trying to sell the idea of AI to start completing each other's sentences, right? So now we get on the phone and they already know what AI can do for them. They know how to get there. They just need somebody to execute. So that's one transition that I've seen. Yeah. A big part of that is, you know, big companies are spending massive budgets, sort of like telling people this, right? And you can get AI from Amazon and Apple, and all of them keep pushing this information. And smaller businesses are realizing, wait a minute, if I don't get on that, you know, if I don't get on that, I'm probably gonna be left behind really, really quick. So they are, you know, they are more, you know, more prepared. They're hiring people that also know what they're doing. And yeah, the shift is definitely happening. Are we there yet? Is everyone now ready for that? No, we still find a lot of companies that they are, again, 1 year, 2 years away from being able to apply machine learning. But it's much better now. Yeah.
And do you see companies, like, I guess the question here is about the kind of creativity, I think, element of it. So it sounds like more and more companies are coming to you ready with a plan about how they think machine learning can be valuable to them. Do you feel as if they've sort of begun to fully explore creatively all the kind of interesting creative things that they might be able to do with machine learning? Or is it a lot of the same kind of problem that now everyone's realizing, oh, you know, machine learning can be used to, you know, stave off user churn or something like that, or detect fraud, or like some common ones? Or are you seeing some really innovative things, or are we still a little farther away from that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think what I've seen is that we are mostly suggesting use cases that don't exist yet. So companies usually think on, like, we call it like cost reduction, right? How do we reduce cost or make this process more efficient? There is another area that's as interesting, if not more, which is how about doing something that you've never been able to do before, right?
Yeah.
That's the area where we are mostly coming up with the ideas and sort of like letting them know, hey, by the way, have you thought about this? The reason we are sort of like leading that conversation is because we've been exposed to so many use cases that it's easy to make the connections. But businesses are mostly right now thinking of how can I get that AI and make my process cheaper or faster or better, but they're not thinking about new use cases. They're not necessarily at a global scale now.
When you make those suggestions, how responsive do they tend to be?
There's usually a wow. There's, if the idea is good, it's sort of like, pause over the phone, people thinking, yeah, that's exactly, wow. Yeah, let us think about that. There is usually this wow factor and this realization, wow, we sort of like been thinking within a box and these guys are coming with a bigger box, right? Like, so yeah.
It's interesting because I think tying back to some of the previous parts of our conversation, for me, I have assumed to some degree that part of what it will take to get ML to sort of the next level of prolific, the next level of everyone, consumers just are totally aware of the way in which it touches every part of their life, is that it won't just be that all of the things we already do get smarter and faster and more efficient and cheaper and all of those things, but it'll be that we start doing completely new things that were only ever made possible from ML. I think sort of like the, some examples that people would say about like until there was 4G, there were certain kinds of, app-based tools that just were, or location-based apps that were just not even available. So I guess that's in my mind, there's something really exciting about that next frontier of like tools that are not just like improvements on our existing tools, but tools that we just wouldn't have had without ML.
Absolutely.
Do you find yourself encountering any of those just yet?
Oh yeah. Well, so the other day we had an entire probably 2-hour conversation thinking about where all of this is going, right? So if you could fast forward 100 years, where are we gonna be in 100 years? And the reality is that every future that we can try to make up, it's completely wrong because we cannot even imagine the things. We don't know what we don't know. I think that's the summary of it, right? Like we were talking about self-driving cars, the conversation started there. I'm like, why are we talking about cars? Is that gonna even be a thing in the 100? Like right now, we cannot see a future without them. But is that efficient? Is that the best way to transport ourselves? Probably not. So why are we, limited? So yeah, it's really hard to look in the future, obviously, and to try to come up with things. But if Moore's law continues to be what it's been, I mean, the future is gonna be pretty crazy. There is a bunch of stuff that, and this is the other thing that I was talking about the other day with another friend. Think about when we invented the telescope. It was in 14, whatever. It took like 200 years after that for the major invention, besides the telescope. And then it took another 100 years for another big invention. And now we are at a pace where we became numb to these breakthroughs because there's so many so quickly, right? Like 5 years ago, self-driving wasn't even in our minds, and now we are putting people on space, like 3 different companies, which is, when you think about it, you take a pause, zoom out. It's amazing how fast we are making things happen. GPT-3 was a huge deal in 2020, and now it feels old. And it's 1 year old. There's all sort of businesses powered by GPT-3, right? Making millions of dollars, and it's 1 year old, right? Feels old at this point. By the way, there are like 3 GPT-3 competitors already. There's one from China, another one from, I don't know, a big company here. It's just incredible how much progress we're making in such a short amount of time. And this is not gonna slow down. We're not seeing, okay, you know what? I think we're getting to it's just
the beginning.
Green field in front of us. Yeah.
And do you think tools wise, it's an interesting note, GPT-3, like that is sort of the trajectory of the pace of at least industry innovation, which is that there are these tools that are foundational that give rise to all of these other tools. GPT-3 sounds like a great example of that. I wonder, is that the model you see for the future, or is there some other way you imagine this proliferating?
Yeah, I think that's one way. The other thing that, now that you mentioned tools, and I don't know if you're referring to this, but I look at the machine learning world right now as the development world was probably back in the 90s, where we didn't have anything. Right now, there's so many great tools for developing software. You get GitHub, and you get all sort of IDEs. There are CI/CD tools, testing tools. We have everything, right? In the machine learning world, we're just starting to see, right? So when you get outside of here you have Jupyter notebooks, and here you have the specific cloud tools that they are sort of like started to develop. There is nothing out there. There's literally nothing out there. People are building small tools to focus on one small problem, and we don't have, none of those are standard, by the way. So if you jump from company to company, everyone is using something either created in-house or completely vendor locked in. And so it is great to see that. I mean, it's not great that we don't have the tools, but it's great to see that, again, it's a green field in front of us. So much innovation is going to happen. And, with better tools, that only means that we're going to be able to provide more and more value more quickly. So yeah, I'm very excited about that for sure.
Yeah, as am I. I think I hear a lot from folks about the similar analogy about where we are in the development cycle of this technology, and how just even the lack of like frameworks and standards and sort of conventions that once those things, there's something kind of beautiful about being in the Wild West element of that, because you get to, roam free in this wide open field. And then as those things start to solidify, I think it only further quickens the pace of development, which is hard to imagine it moving any faster than it already is. Well, I have taken up a lot of your time already. So maybe the last question I'll ask you is just for folks that aren't already kind of keeping up with you, where do they go to stay in touch with you and your work, and how can they stay in touch with you?
Yeah. So I think it's Twitter. Twitter is the main place. I do write on Medium, blogs. I'm not consistent with it. I do have a newsletter, but that I mostly summarize what I posted on Twitter. So Twitter is the main sort of like water cooler place where I go and I discuss everything that's happening. And it's all about machine learning. So there you're not going to see pictures of my cat, number one, because I don't have a cat. Number two, because I don't post pictures. But you're going to get all of the machine learning thoughts that I'm thinking, and ideas and whatnot. Yeah, that's the place.
Terrific. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time. I've had a really great time chatting with you, and thank you for all your work and for being so kind of transparent and communicative about it, because it is such early days for this technology. So it's good to have pioneers that are like standing up and helping to lead the way a little bit. So thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me. That's super fun.
My pleasure. All right. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.
All right. Bye.
All right. Bye.